Alright, let's see if we can't get some Xingqiu constellations. Beto. Okay. Another Wit Sith, really? Good lord, I think mine's R5 at this point. No. Good day, everyone. So, I have Kokomi. Yeah, sad days. So, I guess I'll be talking about her and describing why I specifically think it's indeed sad days. Now, there have been many banners in which I've wished for just to get 4 stars on and not the 5 stars. And while I did not actually want the 5 stars on those banners, and certainly like their design less than Kokomi, I honestly love her design and her animations. All the other 5 stars, the rate-up 5 stars in the game, I feel have a significant place in the game. They perform a unique and useful role, and you can easily build a team with them, whether it's around them or just putting them in a team with other characters to perhaps just add some support damage or something along those lines. And while in those team comps there might be a 4-star option that also works, it's undeniable that they would work better. Kokomi isn't. There's one team comp I have in mind for her, but it's literally just one, and every other thing that I can think of, her spot would be better suited having just a different character. That's kind of how bad she is. And it's not necessarily that, you know, she's completely unusable. It's just that everything she does, somebody else can do just as well, if not better. And so, to get into this and to get a little bit better idea, instead of using my Kokomi that has absolutely not been built even remotely, let's go quickly check out her in the test run. Now, generally speaking, the characters in the test runs are not really up to snuff. They're not really using what they should. Sometimes they'll give them, like, Noblesse set, and it just doesn't even make any sense why they're using that. Or maybe their stats aren't particularly great. But especially if we're looking at her in terms of damage, this is probably one of the better sets, I would say. I don't necessarily know that this is the set I would use. Honestly, I think the 4-piece tenacity might be better because while it won't add as much damage as this will, it will increase everybody else's attack. And if she doesn't seem to do an amazing amount of damage herself, that's probably the better option to go for. If she did amazing damage, then I think the Heart of Death set would definitely be the way to go, as damage bonuses are probably going to be the best thing to go for her, I imagine, and we'll learn why as we go into her talents. But the main point I just wanted to state here is that while this is probably not peak Kokomi, at the same time, it might not be all that different from what an actually properly built Kokomi will look like, especially if you don't have her 5-star weapon. So getting into her talents, her normal attack talent is normal. She just does 3 attacks, and they're basically single target. There are a few times when I think it did hit 2 enemies, so I think it does have sort of the potential to be AoE. However, it was so infrequent, despite having enemies clumped together, that sometimes I wondered if I was literally just seeing things. Her charge attack, as usual for a Catalyst character, has huge scaling and a huge cost. However, her charge attacks are going to be worse in comparison to her normal attacks because of her ultimate, which we'll get into once we get to that point. Her elemental skill is what I would call an off-field healing skill that also applies Hydro once every 2 seconds and deals some damage. Now, the healing itself isn't very large. As you can see, this is actually outside the range. This still is as well. That right there is inside. So it isn't like it has a massive range. It's actually probably smaller than Bennett, but likely similar-ish. Next then, we come to her ultimate. Her ultimate increases her normal attack, charge attack, and Bakekurage damage based on her max HP, and when her normal and charge attacks hit opponents, she will restore HP for all party members nearby. So this allows Kokomi to essentially be both healers. And by both healers, I generally consider there to be 2 kind of healing types in the game. Characters that heal the active character and characters that heal the entire party. Kokomi does both. Her ultimate allows her to heal characters who are in the party, and her elemental skill heals the character who is active. However, aside from herself, she cannot do both of these at the same time. Either a character aside Kokomi is out in the field, meaning they are getting healed by the Bakekurage, and not, rather obviously, being healed by her ultimate as she isn't active to be performing normal and charge attacks. Or she is the active character, in which case she can heal with her ultimate, but rather obviously, any other character isn't getting healed by the Bakekurage. Meaning that while she is both, for anyone other than herself, she is only one or the other. Then we come to her talents. The first talent essentially extends the Bakekurage's duration upon using her ultimate, so it's essentially like a slightly worse version of Fischl's ultimate, as it only extends the duration and will not spawn it, unlike Fischl's ultimate will. Her next passive, the Song of Pearls, is Hot Doo-Doo, as it increases the normal and charge stack damage bonus that you gain from her ultimate. So not the entirety of her normal and charge stacks, just the portion that she gains from the ultimate by 15% of her healing damage bonus. Now, to explain why this is so bad, I think some people may look at this and see, oh, she gets a damage bonus off of her healing bonus, so I can go with a healing bonus headpiece. However, how much healing bonus does the healing circlet give? Rounded up, it's 36%. Well, 15% of 36 is about a 4% damage bonus. So giving her a healing circlet will only give her an additional 4% damage bonus. Kokomi does give herself a 25% healing damage bonus, which will give her about a 3.75% additional damage bonus. And that comes at the cost of 100% decreased crit rate. So yes, you can find some stuff, some 5-star weapon with crit rate on it and a crit rate circlet and just gear with ungodly amounts of crit rate and then put her in a team with 2 cryo characters and then give her the Blizzard Strayer set and try to get her crit to be above 100% so that she can sort of crit at all. But honestly, I'm not sure that it's worth it. That's a lot of work so that a character can barely crit. However, honestly speaking, I don't think this is in any way the worst thing about Kokomi. This is not, in my opinion, what ruins Kokomi as a character. Because we can go ahead and take a look at her damage. In the test run, during her ultimate, Bakekurage does about 4,700 damage. Her normal attacks do range in between from 7,000 to 7,500, and her charge stack does barely any more than her normal attacks do, so it really isn't worth using. So with 7,000 damage, and with the assumption that if we were to build Kokomi ourselves, we could get her to have some higher numbers, that's not too bad, honestly speaking. Sure, it's nowhere near what other high damage characters can do, but she is a healer and she is Hydro. So theoretically, we could fill the team roster with a bunch of really good off-field high damage supports that'll benefit off of the Hydra that she provides, and it should be okay. However, there are a number of issues with this. As I mentioned earlier, our normal attacks are near as makes no difference single target. It's incredibly difficult to hit more than one enemy with her normal attacks at all. And as the Bakekurage only applies Hydro once every 2 seconds, that means that aside from a single enemy, Kokomi really isn't very good at applying her element, and her damage, despite not being that amazing, can really only be done for the most part to one enemy. So damage-wise, she's essentially Yoimiya, who I believe is widely accepted to have issues, except significantly worse. And while in the outside of the trial world, where we have the likes of Bennett and so on and so forth, to greatly increase the damage of characters like Yoimiya and so on, Kokomi's attack provides only a small portion of her overall damage. So even if you buff her with a Bennett, that's not really going to increase her damage very much. And so likely it simply isn't really worth using, because as you can see here, her attack is only contributing about 1,600 worth of damage. But during her ultimate, she deals about 6,000. So because, unlike characters like, say, Hu Tao, who turn their HP into attack, and so all of their kit goes through their talent, Kokomi's does not. The majority of it, really, actually comes through her ultimate. Now, because of this, and you can see the damage difference went from 1600 to 6000, showing you the difference of scaling with HP versus attack, and how effective that means her normal attack talent actually is, means that her talent priority is likely ultimate, then skill, then normal attack, as the normal attacks themselves aren't actually doing that much damage. And so even if we buff her a bunch with the likes of Bennett or Kujo Sora, she really won't gain much of a damage increase, unlike other characters who will see an immense damage increase. So I shouldn't expect to see her numbers actually be that much improved. So her numbers aren't very good, and they're only to basically one enemy. And as they're only to one enemy, that means she might be decent at applying Hydro to a single enemy, and so good for perhaps bosses and so on and so forth like that. But not very good against any situation where you have more than one enemy, and you want to be applying Hydro to all of them to enable, say, Zhangling to vaporize. So I would say, honestly, that this talent in and of itself isn't the thing that ruins Kokomi. In a large way, a bigger reason what ruins her is the fact that her normal attacks essentially can hit only one enemy. If her normal attacks had a much larger AoE explosion that occurred upon hitting an enemy, and thus allowed her to be a very effective Hydro applier, I think she'd have a significantly better place in the game, because then she'd be a healer that does some damage that allows your other characters to make use of the Hydro aura she applies. But as in a situation with multiple enemies, she essentially can only apply Hydro with her Bake Kurage, which only does it once every 2 seconds. That simply isn't going to be enough for any effective elemental reaction team comp whatsoever. However, this is by far and away not the only issues that plague Kokomi. She sadly has even more. Another major issue about her is her ultimate. It costs 70 energy. Now, her Bake Kurage actually does provide, I would say, a very decent amount of energy particles. It provides 1 Hydro particle every time it hits, which is every 2 seconds. So that means over a 10-second period of time, she provides 5 Hydro particles. This is about half of what Fischl provides, but 1 additional particle over what, say, Ayaka does. So while not perhaps amazing, it's perfectly decent. However, decent is not enough for a 70 energy cost. I cannot see you being able to use her ultimate off cooldown if you simply leave her as is, which means you will either have to take your timepiece from being, say, HP percentage into energy recharge, which will mean her dealing even less damage, or to pair her with a Hydro battery. Now, what characters would work for her as a Hydro battery? Mona could be a bit of a Hydro battery. However, I have to say, I'm not entirely sure why you would use the two of them together, as Mona can already provide some Hydro off-field anyway, while providing a large damage bonus. So if you're going to use Mona, I think there's probably better options to use instead of Kokomi. Barbara is a healer, and so once again makes it so there's not much reason to be using Kokomi, but significantly worse than that, she doesn't provide any energy with her elemental skill anyway, and so rather obviously it can't be a battery for Kokomi. Child could perhaps work, but honestly I don't totally know how Child works as I do not have him, so you'll have to leave that to anyone who does. So finally then, we have Xingqiu. Xingqiu could be a fantastic battery for Kokomi. However, there's a very significant caveat to this. And before we get to that caveat, however, we need to look at how good of a healer she actually is. Now, of course, once again, I'm sure you can probably get more HP and so on and so forth than the Kokomi that is given in the trial run, but even so, once again, she is using a weapon with a very large HP secondary stat, and her Bake Kurage heals for about 5,000 health. Now, this might seem okay or good, perhaps, but if you take a look at Bennett, even though my Bennett is probably in a similar situation, if not worse, in terms of how much healing he actually outputs, he heals for around 4,600, but he heals once every second, so his ultimate heals for nearly double what Koki's elemental skill does. However, of course, we could then look at her ultimate, because that's not her only healing, is it? Let's see. 925. Now, back in 1.2, my Noelle, I think, was healing for about 800 per normal attack. So that means that Noelle's party healing is very similar to Kokomi's party healing. And as for any other character, Kokomi essentially can only do one or the other. That means that ignoring Kokomi's element, using Noelle is no worse than using Kokomi. In some ways, even better, because while Kokomi has her Bake Kurage to additionally heal her, Noelle has shields. And also with Noelle, her first passive gives you a ridiculous safety net for your other character. Because if any of your other characters are on field and fall below 30% health, she will pop a shield worth 400% of her defense. And once again, back in 1.1, my Noelle had over 2000 defense. So that's over an 8000 shield, ignoring the fact that it's Geo, which drastically decreases the amount of damage it actually takes. And so if you are ever on another character and they fall in a danger zone, Noelle will save them for long enough such that you can swap to her and then heal them back to safety. Kokomi has no such thing. So ignoring element, I legitimately don't see Kokomi being any better of an on-field healer. In fact, I'd say worse than Noelle. And this is especially considering the fact that once again, Kokomi does damage basically to one enemy, whereas Noelle has huge sweeping AoEs. So while Kokomi I think will probably do more damage than Noelle single target, if there's any more than one enemy, I think Noelle will increase her damage over Kokomi more and more. Within a 2-second span of time, Kokomi can probably heal maybe for about 3000 health here, assuming that she can get her full attack combo off in 2 seconds. So that means she heals herself for 5000 due to Bakekurage, and then an additional 3000 from her normal attacks, for a total of 8000. Whereas Bennett heals for 4600 every second, and so is healing for 9200 to any active character. So that means that Bennett can heal any active character for more than Kokomi can heal herself. But that is ignoring element. Kokomi has an element. Kokomi is Hydra, which is necessary for Vaporize or Freeze comps. And this actually is what brings us back to the issue with Xingqiu. If the only real reason to use Kokomi over, say, just Noelle, a character you literally get for free, is her element and her ability to apply Hydro, and in order to use her ultimate, you need to pair her with the best Hydro applier in the entire game, why are you using Kokomi? If you want to be applying Hydro and you now have to use Xingqiu anyway, why not just use Noelle, who has much better AoE, insane shields, and if you so chose, you could give her the Archaic Petra set to give a specific element in the party a 35% damage bonus. Whereas Kokomi, really the best you can do is a 20% attack bonus with the Tenacity set. And this is where I come to really my issues with Kokomi. It's not simply that, oh, she doesn't do enough damage, or oh, her healing isn't enough. Every time I try to put her into any sort of team comp, I realize that there are other characters, 4-star option characters, that are actually better. Not simply a 4-star version, and so, oh, you don't need to waste your Primo Gems to get this character that's only slightly better, but actually worse. Now, with that having been said, for anyone who accidentally got Kokomi and wants to somehow attempt to use her, or for people who just love her design so much, that doesn't really matter whether she's good or bad, or if there's a better option readily available to you, you still want to use her. The only team comp I can think that actually makes sense to use her in would be to pair her with Raiden, Xiangling, and then a flex spot. Now, the reason why I think this makes more sense than, say, using Xingqiu is, once again, using Xingqiu kind of invalidates Kokomi. Whereas the Raiden Shogun, because Kokomi does generate a decent amount of energy particles for herself, and her ultimate does cost 70 instead of 80, Raiden, with a good amount of energy recharge, might be able to perform as enough of a battery for Kokomi to be able to use her ultimate frequently. And with these two, you're able to apply Hydro all the time, mostly to one enemy again, unfortunately, and with Raiden electrocharged for Xiangling to then Vaporize and Overload. Now, the final slot here, you could probably use a few different characters, and your first option might be to think of just, oh, throw Bennett in here, but once again, if you're using Bennett, who is, I would say, a better healer than Kokomi, then there's really no reason to actually be using Kokomi in this team. You should simply replace Kokomi with Xingqiu, as he'll probably do as much, if not more, off-field damage than Kokomi will deal on-field damage, will be better at applying Hydro, provides everyone interruption resistance, as well as a very nice incoming damage decrease, and has an easier time applying frequent Hydro to multiple enemies if you get them close. So from my perspective, honestly, I think that one of the best characters probably, and perhaps strangely, would be to put Ayaka into this group, as this is a group that, in many ways, all the characters kind of work together. Raiden performs as a battery for all these high-costing ultimate characters, while doing some nice on-field damage, and providing a damage bonus, mostly to Xiangling and Ayaka. Kokomi is the healer of the group, while applying the Hydro needed for Ayaka to freeze, while at the same time for Xiangling to Vaporize, Overload, and, depending on how you want your rotations to go, melt. So this team, I think, could possibly be decent. Now, one thing I do think I will do is, because this team comp is somewhat similar to using Raiden, Zhengling, Xingqiu, and Bennett, is that once the next Abyss rotation hits, I will throw this team into the second half of the Spiral Abyss, see how it goes, and then try throwing in the Raiden, Zhengling, Xingqiu, and Bennett team into the second half and see which one seems to perform better. Because, once again, even if this team performs decent, if this team with 3 rate-up 5-star characters gets beat out by a team with 3 4-stars, and this being honestly the only team comp I can think of that Kokomi makes any sense over other 4-star options, will really put the nail in the coffin for me that Kokomi is quite possibly not just the worst 5-star character in the game, but just one of the worst characters in the game in general. Not because she necessarily by herself is terrible, but because there's always an option that you can choose to put in her slot that will perform the role better. And so, I think this is pretty much the reason why I would say that Kokomi is a bad character. She heals fine, her single target damage is fine, and she applies Hydra fine. But that's it. She simply performs a number of roles fine, and she provides nothing else to the party. Nothing in the way of damage bonuses such as other supports, like say Mona. And I can only say that it really is a ridiculous shame, because I do absolutely adore her appearance. Her character description, more so than what we've actually seen of her in the game, was very endearing to me as well, and her animations are fantastic, and she's just overall adorable. And yet, even having her, not having to think about, oh, should I pull for her or not, just having got her without intending, I still really can't think of much of any way where she can perform a role that a different character wouldn't perform better. And really does make me wonder what exactly MiHoYo is doing. Since Inazuma has come out, we've had characters that either people absolutely adore or have been waiting for an incredibly long time, and yet they consecutively seem to have very significant issues. Ayaka has fantastic burst damage. It's absolutely amazing in my opinion. However, it itself has very significant issues. It's very small. You essentially have to use a freeze character in order to reasonably land it against any enemies that can be staggered, and for any enemies that can't be staggered and move around at all, could render her practically useless, as her ultimate is where pretty much all of her damage really comes from. Yoimiya is pretty much purely single target, and yet doesn't really do any more damage than characters that can deal that same damage to many enemies. Raiden Shogun is a pretty good battery, but not good enough to allow the 80 cost characters, which she wants to be paired with, to be able to go full damage, and Beidou, who would be the best character in the game hands down to pair her with, doesn't work with her. And now we have Kokomi, who confuses me to the point of where I've only been able to think of one team comp where she actually possibly makes sense to use over just another character. So I really do wonder what MiHoYo is doing. And I've heard an opinion, which I myself had never thought of, which I do think has a strong possibility of being correct, which is maybe MiHoYo is simply testing whether characters sell because they are good or because they are ridiculously adorable / lovable. And so for me, I think that pretty much about sums up my thoughts on Kokomi. I am very disappointed in the way MiHoYo has built her as a character and how they have treated her during the story, which I shall be making a video about in possibly a few days. And I'm honestly just confused about what they are doing with their game in general. But let me know what you think. Have you rolled for Kokomi? If you have, what do you think of her? If you haven't, why not? What team comps do you think she would work well in? Do let me know down below in the comments. Thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you again next time, and hope you all have a great day.